Hi, so today I'm going to give you a summary of all the progress I've made so far on my first novel, which will be where my writing diary in this channel will be starting from. So I'll be going over the summary and the origins of my project, so the basic inspiration, it's D&D related, and then I'll talk about my writing process and the speed that I go at, sort of give you an idea of how I work as a beginner writer. Uh, And then I'll actually summarize everything I'm doing, and I'll actually show you a bit of my first draft. I'll show you a bit of the document that I work on, and the overall structure and where I'm at as in terms of the story. And then I'll talk about the aspects I'm focusing on. So what I want to focus on with the character arcs I have in the story, with the plotting, and how these things sort of interact, because the character arcs and the plotting are very, very strongly intertwined in this novel. So I'll be talking about that. And then finally, I'll be talking about my future plans for the book, so what I'm currently doing, what I'll be doing in the future with it. So I hope this will get you all up to date. So the seed for my first novel began, I think it was 2 years ago. So yeah, 2 years ago. Wow, it's been a while. So it was the end of 2020 when the idea for novel first came to me. So at the time, I was reading a book called Carry On by Rainbow Rowell, and in that book, rather than it being the overall idea of this book, there was one line where the characters mention a magical creature, which is also a creature in Indian mythology, a Rakshasa. And I took with this idea in it, and I originally came up with an idea for a D&D campaign that I was going to run for my friends. And that one of them would play a character who was involved with this antagonist who would be the Rakshasa. And that would be part of their backstory that I'd work with them with. But I got so into the idea, and I actually started writing notes in a notebook, just as an idea for a D&D campaign, that I decided that I'd seriously attempt to write this as a novel instead. It was a simple idea, the setting wasn't complicated, but I had a strong idea for the plot, and I had some interesting things I wanted to do with the narrative structure. And so I just went with that. I worked with it fairly slowly in 2021, just little bits. I think I only wrote about 2,000 words, so I was very much I just looked at it a few times, really. And then at the end of that year, I started to work on it more intensively. So actually probably writing every week or so. And the idea sort of kept going up, and I'm sort of now regularly thinking about it fairly often. So the story is a adventure mystery sort of thing. It's actually surprisingly hard to summarize. I'm very cagey about explaining it because a lot of what would directly explain a lot would actually be spoilers. So, when I get around to writing a blurb for this thing, I probably will just have to rip the band-aid off and spoil a bit there. But it is an adventure mystery that involves after a kidnapping of someone related to the main character. She and a group of her companions, something like that, go on an adventure to retrieve her from the antagonist. And it's about the character relationship between the protagonist and the antagonist, because for various means they're actually able to interact as the story progresses. And a lot of the plotting and character work actually will revolve around sort of the philosophical, sort of moral underpinnings of their relationship, and how their different ideas about how they should act and what they should do sort of change how they view each other. And that is sort of really becomes the focus of the story. And that's why I said that the character arcs and the plot are very intertwined with one another. In fact, they're almost the same. So that's a summary of of where my novel came from. So now on to my writing process. My writing process is relatively simple. I have sort of short 1 to 2 hour sessions that I try and do whenever possible. So this is part of me trying to fit in my writing established regularity. Because at the moment, they're mostly just whenever I get the time or whenever I have the motivation. So I want to establish more regularity, but they're usually 1 to 2 hours, so relatively short compared to most writers. I usually listen to specific music, not just any music. I have 1 or 2 specific playlists that I listen to while writing, and I actually find that I've gotten used to the specific order of the tracks because I don't play these playlists on shuffle, and that I find that helpful, that familiarity helpful, and locking me into the creative process somehow. I usually write about 300 words an hour. I can get up to 350, if it sort of would be my top speed at the moment, but usually it's more around 300 words an hour is where I'm at. And I have a small outline. It's not really an outline. Basically, it's a document where I write notes about the story whenever there is, an element that I'm uncertain how to proceed with. So when I was partway through the introducing 2 side characters in this document, I wrote some things about their personality and information about them, because I hadn't really thought about them much. I had them in my head, but I hadn't really gone over them because I was writing stuff before. And so that's what I do. I usually just write things like that down when I need to. So while it's organized because I don't want it to be messy, it's just kind of whatever I think is necessary. And then for initial editing, after a few writing sessions, once I've got a few thousand words down, 1,000 is actually enough, but I usually try and do a bit more. I edit the section I've just written for grammar mistakes and to ensure its clarity. And I do this with my mum. She's involved in kind of the literary world and sort of involved with books a lot, so she is very helpful with that and fairly enthusiastic. And then for revisions, I only intend to do a proper revision to really change the actual content of writing once I finish the first draft. And there'll probably be a few big passes for structural things, so ensuring the character is more consistent, because the character arc I've written from the main POV so far, I think I've expressed the points I want to make in individual scenes well, but I think I need to have something that makes it kind of connect a bit more. So probably a few passes for individual elements like that, as I refine the novel once I finish writing the first draft. So that's my basic process. So this is the document where I am writing my novel. As you can see, it's just a regular Google Docs, and I've brought up the word count thing here to show you that I'm currently at 17,313 words. And so that's maybe a fifth or a sixth of the way through the total novel. I don't know exactly how long it's going to be in the end, as I'm mostly discovery writing it. But given that your average novel is somewhere between 80 and 100,000 words, a fifth or a sixth seems about right. Although fantasy novels do tend to be longer, so a regular length fantasy novel, it would be expected that it could be up to 120,000 words. So maybe I'm a bit less. If I just exit out of this, you can see that I've created an outline on the side here to help me sort of manage and quickly flick between chapters and sections as I'm going. And so there are 8 parts, which are sort of the provisional chapters, and I've given them little subtitles so I have some idea what went on when I wrote those chapters and what's going on in the plot. Although they're a little vague, but I know what they mean. So you can see there are 8 chapters and also 3 interludes. The first interlude's not actually right at the start, so as you can see at the top where I am now, there's a short section before the first interlude. And those interludes will be interspersed regularly throughout the novel, and they are all written from one POV. I'm not sure exactly how many there's going to be, but if the current pace goes, there'll be at least 15. So the interludes are all quite short. These parts will all be separated out in the end, and so this is only a few hundred words. and they'll be on their own separate pages. And so I write little notes to myself, either when there's something particular I want to say at the story, so this was a bit I felt I didn't write very well, that I wanted to go back and do. So that will be a note when I'm coming around for revision. Or if I am remembering something that I've thought of, that what I'm going to do next. So that's the case here. I have downloaded Word documents off my computer, which are all the different versions. So every maybe month or so of writing, so at least every chapter is approximately not saved alone, but saved when it was originally written. So I'll have that saved, I'll have an archive. And I think that pretty much sums up everything I want to show you about about the draft itself. For my first novel, given the plot that it has, I'm trying to focus on a few different specific things that will really come out in the writing, and that I hope to be sort of the selling points of my book, because no way am I going to be able to focus on all things, and I've never done this before. As in terms of plot, the main thing is really the character relationships and development, because it is what drives both the plot and the character arcs. They're very similar, intertwined, as I explained before, and I really want to sort of make the personality come through of the main POV, of Oriana is her name, in not just how she's acting, but because we're in her POV, the descriptions and broader things, how she explains what she's seeing around her. I love description, so I'm trying to lean into that and use that as a bit of a tool to add to the characterization. The magic system will also be important. Maybe system is a bit too strong of a word to describe it, as it's not really understood scientifically by any of the characters in the story. It's more a part of the sort of stories and legend and culture of the world. Part of the reasoning for this is that it primarily functions through imagination, so you have to use your imagination to conjure an effect using energy. And so there's no physical thing to observe about how it actually, the mechanism of how it works, which means it's very vague and very wondrous to all of the characters. And so I want this to come through in the descriptions. Even though the main character is used to her ability to use this, she still can't really describe it concretely, because it's this very abstract thing going on in her mind. And I think that will sort of add to, I guess, part of the mystery, the story. It's not really related to the plot, but it's more, it will give it more of a flavour to the plotting and the character, and it adds more stakes in, because it's very dangerous to use. And finally, the world building. Now, in this case, I came up with the story for the plot and the characters. The world building is fairly minor and mostly sits in the background supporting everything else. The story could, in theory, take place in another setting and it would be fine. It's mostly just to ground the story and feel like the characters are real and that they have proper intentions, so as to feel that as the story is not purely just about character. Without some world building, it would kind of, a lot of the motivations of the characters would feel hollow, as you don't have context to why they're acting that way. But the world building itself won't heavily feature in what I'm doing. Those are really aspects I want to focus on. I think those three main things will be enough for a first novel. For my future plans, so far in the book, all of the chapters that are not the interludes are just from the main character's POV. But I'm potentially thinking, depending on how the story goes, and because a lot of the character conversation is very important to the plot, that I might write some full chapters in the antagonist's POV, or even potentially in like a third-person POV, a third-person omniscient. That might be a bit weird. I'll figure out as I go along. And a lot of what I want to do with my plans will actually be in the revision. So this will be reviewing character arcs, particularly for the side characters, because they're not super well developed. But thus far, they kind of, most of the effort I put into them is just making sure that they feel not wooden with the stuff they're doing, but they don't necessarily have a deeper inner life or, I guess, character that sort of makes them potentially seem more real rather than just kind of, a strong stock character. Not wooden, but kind of just there for a role. Yeah, and I'll probably actually rewrite some of the first paragraphs. Now I've gotten past the introduction section, the actual plot in the first few chapters is probably okay, but the pacing and some of the conversations probably need to be changed. The initial one, I think, the very initial section before the first chapter, I think is a good place to start the story, but I didn't really know that much about what the tone would be and how all the narration would be characterized when I first wrote it. So it probably needs to be rewritten, and I can use it to fill in a bit more of the world building in a way that is a bit more interesting. So I think that about covers everything for my novel. I'm excited to get into doing this and to hopefully find a consistent pattern of writing. Thank you for watching me, and I hope you'll join me in the short little diary entries I'll be posting whenever. Thanks.